Nobody in that stadium breathed for 4 seconds. Not the 50,000 people in the seats. Not the players in both dugouts. Not the broadcast crew, not the vendors halfway up the aisle, not the ball boy crouched in the corner of the foul line. 4 seconds of complete, total stillness. Because what they had just watched an umpire do, in the 6th inning, in the middle of a dominant performance, in front of a full stadium and a national broadcast, was something that nobody in professional baseball could remember seeing done to this particular player, in this particular way, with this particular level of confidence that it was somehow justified. He had grabbed the glove. Then he had pulled the sleeve. And now Shohei Ohtani was being ejected from a game he was winning. The 4 seconds ended. And then the sound came. Before the 6th inning, the story of that night had been straightforward. Ohtani on the mound. Ohtani at the plate. The kind of performance that people drive hours to witness and then spend years trying to describe accurately to people who weren't there. His ERA entering that inning sat at 0.74, a number that statisticians had run through their models multiple times because the first answer kept coming back looking like a misprint. His sweeper was doing things to opposing hitters that former all-stars on broadcast desks were struggling to find language for. The Dodgers were ahead. The game was in hand. 5 innings of complete, suffocating dominance. He walked out for the 6th. Nothing about his walk suggested anything unusual. The same stride. The same stillness. The cap pulled the same way, the glove hanging the same way, the expression carrying the same contained certainty that had defined every inning before it. He reached the mound. He threw his warm-up pitches. The batter stepped in. And then the umpire moved toward him. The approach itself took perhaps 6 seconds. 6 seconds is a long time when nothing else is moving. The batter stepped out. The catcher stood. Both dugouts leaned forward. The crowd, sensing something before it fully understood what it was sensing, began to shift, that low collective murmur that a stadium makes when 50,000 individual people simultaneously decide to pay closer attention. The umpire reached the mound. He reached for the glove first. Took it. Turned it over. Examined the palm, the fingers, the webbing. The inspection protocol that has existed since the foreign substance rules changed, the protocol that most pitchers experience as a brief, unremarkable 10-second formality between innings, not mid-at-bat, not in the 6th inning of a dominant start, not like this. Then he reached for the sleeve. Pushed it back. Looked at the forearm. Looked at the wrist. Looked at the hand. Ohtani stood perfectly still through all of it. That stillness is the detail that everyone who was watching that night will remember first. Not the umpire's hands on the glove. Not the sleeve being pushed back. Ohtani's face. The absolute, complete refusal to give the moment anything it was asking for. No reaction. No gesture. No words visible on the lip-read cameras that immediately zoomed in looking for them. He stood there and let it happen, and he looked, somehow, like the calmest person on the field. The ruling came anyway. Ejected. The word landed in that stadium like something physical. Because nobody had found anything. That was the detail that cut through everything else in the seconds after the ejection was signaled. The inspection had happened. The glove had been examined. The sleeve had been pulled. And nothing, no substance, no foreign material, no evidence of anything that the rulebook was designed to catch, had been produced. And he was still being ejected. The crowd found its voice. Not gradually. All at once. The kind of sound that a stadium produces when the collective emotional temperature crosses a threshold that individual restraint can no longer hold. It came from everywhere simultaneously, the lower deck and the upper deck and the bleachers and the standing sections, and it rose and it stayed risen and it did not diminish for a long time. Ohtani turned. He did not look at the umpire. He did not spread his hands in the universal gesture of disbelief. He did not point at the umpire, or at the sky, or at anything. He pulled his cap down slightly, he picked up his things, and he walked toward the dugout. The walk took maybe 15 seconds. It felt much longer. At the top step of the dugout, a teammate was already there. He had come up from the bench the moment the ejection was signaled. Not running. Not charging. Walking with the same deliberate energy of someone who has made a decision and is no longer questioning it. He reached the top step and he looked out at the umpire who was still standing on the mound. And he said it. "You have a misunderstanding of Ohtani." Not loudly. Not the way arguments get made in baseball, the chest forward, jaw out, cap brim to forehead confrontation that the sport has choreographed across 150 years of close calls and disputed rulings. Quiet. Controlled. Pointed. 7 words. They were picked up by a nearby microphone. They were clipped and posted and viewed and shared and translated and discussed in languages that have nothing to do with baseball within hours of the game ending. 7 words that somehow contained, in their precision and their restraint, everything that the stadium had been screaming in the language of pure noise. A misunderstanding. Not a conspiracy. Not malice. A misunderstanding. The particular kind that is in some ways worse than malice because it cannot be argued with on moral grounds. It can only be corrected. And the correction, in this case, had come too late for the 6th inning, too late for the mound, too late for the player who was already inside the dugout and no longer part of the game. The umpire stood on the mound. He did not respond. The investigation opened before the final out was recorded. That is how quickly the league understood what it was dealing with. Not the next morning. Not in a statement released after a night of internal review. Before the game ended. Before the post-game press conference. Before the broadcast had signed off and the stadium had emptied. Someone in the league office had watched what happened in the 6th inning and made a phone call. The crew was contacted. Footage was being pulled. The specific sequence of events, what triggered the inspection, what protocol was followed, what justification existed for both the inspection and the ejection that followed it, was being reconstructed from every available camera angle. The rulebook language on foreign substance inspections is specific. The authority exists. Umpires have the right to inspect. They have exercised that right across hundreds of games since the policy was implemented. But that authority does not exist in a vacuum. It requires initiation. It requires, in most professional interpretations of the rules, some observable basis, a complaint from the opposing bench, an anomalous movement pattern flagged by the crew, something that places the inspection within the boundaries of protocol rather than outside them. What was the observable basis on June 3? 24 hours after the ejection, the league had not answered that question publicly. 48 hours after, it still had not. The investigation, the league said in its second official communication, was ongoing. The circumstances were being examined thoroughly. A final determination would be shared when the review was complete. The baseball world did not wait patiently. By midnight, the story had left the stadium entirely. What happened next belongs to a part of modern life that the sport did not design and cannot fully control. The umpire's name had been identified within the first hour. His professional history, every notable call, every disputed ruling, every game he had worked going back years, was being assembled by people who had access to databases and databases of time and a very particular kind of motivated attention. That is where the story darkened. Because the criticism, however sharp, however justified, however sustained, became something else by the early hours of the morning. It became a threat. The specific, direct, personal kind that requires a response beyond a statement. The kind that involves law enforcement. The kind that transforms a baseball controversy into a security situation. The umpires' union released a statement. It condemned the threats in unambiguous terms. It noted that no call, no ruling, no decision made on a baseball field justifies what was now being directed at the individual who made it. The union was correct. The league echoed the statement. Law enforcement was engaged. Security protocols for the crew were updated before the following day's games. A glove inspection had produced a law enforcement situation. That is the sentence that captures what the sixth inning had become by the time the sun came up on June 4. The debate that ran underneath all of it, the one that the analysts and the former players and the people who follow this sport most closely were having while the threats made the larger headlines, was quieter but more important. It was about what, exactly, the umpire had misunderstood. Because the teammate's 7 words pointed at something real. Something that the sport has been quietly reckoning with ever since Ohtani's staff began doing what it does at the level it does. His sweeper moves. It moves late, it moves sharply, it moves in the way that pitches move when mechanics and athleticism and years of refinement produce something at the absolute outer boundary of what human pitching can be. That kind of movement, historically, has raised questions. Not because there is evidence, but because there is no prior framework for it. Because the human instinct, when confronted with something that exceeds the familiar range of experience, is to search for an explanation outside of talent. Because a ball that breaks that late, thrown by an arm that also hits with that authority, does not fit neatly inside the categories that 150 years of baseball have built. And so someone looked. Without, as the investigation was making increasingly clear, adequate grounds to look. That is what the 7 words meant. Not that the umpire was corrupt. Not that there was a conspiracy against the greatest two-way player the sport has ever produced. But that a system built on precedent and pattern recognition had encountered something it did not have a category for, and had responded by reaching for the nearest available explanation. The nearest available explanation happened to be wrong. And Ohtani had paid for it with his 6th inning. The manager spoke at the podium with the careful precision of someone who understood that every word he chose was going to matter. He said the team supported the review process. He said the organization believed the league would handle the investigation with the seriousness it deserved. He said that the player had handled the situation with the professionalism that everyone inside that clubhouse expected from him. Then he paused. "I'll say this," he said. "What you saw tonight, the way he walked off that mound, that's not a man who's been caught doing something wrong. That's a man who knows exactly who he is and what he's done. And he didn't need to say a word because that walk said everything." A reporter asked about the teammate's comment. The 7 words. Whether the manager agreed with the assessment. He looked at the table for a moment. "I think it was accurate," he said. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. In the clubhouse, Ohtani sat in front of his locker and gave brief answers to brief questions. He was not visibly angry. He was not visibly upset. He had the expression of a man who had already filed the evening in whatever internal drawer he keeps for things that are outside his control, and had returned his attention to the things that are inside it. His next start. His next at-bat. The work that waits regardless of what happens in any single 6th inning. A reporter asked him directly, what did he think when the umpire approached? He thought for a moment. "I just waited," he said. "Whatever needed to happen, I let it happen. And then I walked in." That was the complete answer. No grievance. No demand for acknowledgement. No statement about fairness or unfairness or what the investigation should or shouldn't find. Just, I waited, and then I walked in. The ruling is still under review. The investigation is ongoing. The umpire, somewhere, is working through whatever this particular week has brought him. And Shohei Ohtani is preparing for his next start. That is the distance between them. The distance between the person at the center of the storm and the storm itself. The storm swirls. The investigation proceeds. The threats get monitored and the statements get issued and the debate runs in every direction at once. And at the center of all of it, the reason any of it is happening, the reason 50,000 people made that sound and 7 words traveled around the world and a league office made phone calls before a game was finished. He is just preparing for his next start. Already ahead. Already somewhere none of this can reach him.